Welcome back to what we're reading. This is part 2, the Inferno.
Part 2 of what Tim's reading the Inferno. Quick reorientation. This is a medieval poem written in the 1300s by a guy named Dante, who's from Florence. And it is about a kind of imagined journey that he takes in middle age. He has suffered a lot of injustice. He has experienced a lot of tyranny. He has been robbed of his home, of his possessions, of his relationships. And part of the way he's working through that and processing that is he writes this very long poem about Virgil, the Roman poet, leading him through hell, down through hell, and then through purgatory, and then through heaven, through paradise. And so the whole thing altogether, these 3 parts of it are called the Divine Comedy. Not like, ha, 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 it's so silly comedy, but comedy in the kind of literary sense of something very sad that has a very happy ending, opposite of a tragedy, where things start out happy and they end very sad. And so again, we are Protestants. We're glad to be Protestants. We have lots of Roman Catholic friends, and we appreciate them and love them. But just qualifying this, we don't believe in purgatory. There's a lot of what we think are unbiblical and anti-biblical accretions that coming through in Dante about hell, about the afterlife, about heaven, but that he has a lot of good insights for us to learn from today. Both as kind of theological, philosophical, ethical ideas, but also just the beauty of his poetry and of his imagery and the way he describes these things. And that it's important for us, even in our modern technological world, to be reading poetry and enjoying literature, even though, of course, in one sense, you could much more efficiently distill it down to principles and statements, but you lose almost everything when you do that. So anyways, last time we talked about Dante's journey through the 4th circle of hell, where he sees the miserly and the prodigal, the savers and the spenders, locked in endless combat with each other in hell. They hate each other. They thought they were the opposite of each other, but it turns out they're the same thing. They both have become so focused on the things of this world that they have lost the world, and they actually have also lost their identities in doing so. Today I thought it'd be interesting to talk some more about these themes that Bitcoiners are interested in, that people who are interested in finance are interested in, because as Dante goes on, he 2 more circles down in hell, in the 6th circle, he has now crossed from the sins of passion, the kind of the highest and less serious, the least serious part of hell are the sins of incontinence, the sins of losing control, the sins of not being able to get a good handle on your desires. And that includes what we talked about last time, the wrathful, the slothful, the miserly, the prodigal, people who were excessively handing themselves over to their own desires. But then you get into kind of the second of 3 chunks of sins in the Inferno. And Dante is arguing, and this is built on some medieval philosophy and theology, that worse than the sins of incontinence, worse than the sins of losing self-control, are now the sins of violence. And then the worst of all is the sins of fraud. And so at the very center of hell is Satan himself, along with Judas Iscariot, as those who defrauded their masters, who turned in pride and arrogance against those who were over them. But in the middle part of hell, we have the sins of violence. And so Dante is now traveling from the first people, again, remember, as you go down into hell in the Inferno, you are getting into worse and worse sins that are being punished more intensely. So he has crossed now to the realm of the violent, and the first group he sees are murderers. And they are, again, Dante has this just wild imagery that he comes up with to depict how these sins are punished. Murderers are being boiled in blood. This is their punishment. And some of them are being boiled in less blood. Some of them are being boiled in more blood. Dante says some of them are up to their eyes in boiling blood. Some of them are just up to their ankles in boiling blood. But it's totally grisly and wild. This is why poetry is so great.
It sounds like basically doom.
It's basically doom in the 1300s. Lots of boiling blood. But what I thought was interesting is you first come across just regular old murderers, just kind of basic bread and butter murder. But then right after them, he comes across tyrants as a different form of murderer. They're in deeper blood. They're in deeper boiling blood. And part of why Dante says that tyrants are there in this realm of violence is not just because they have committed violence against people and have actually murdered people, which, of course, as we all know, especially from the 20th century and lots of totalitarianism, that includes a lot of murdering actual people. But also, Dante says, because they committed violence against people's property. And so for Dante, what makes you a tyrant and not just a murderer is that you destroy people and you destroy their stuff, and that this is one of the conspicuous aspects of being a tyrant. So this is in Canto 11, the 11th part of the Inferno. Virgil tells Dante, "By violent means a man can kill his neighbor or wound him grievously. His goods may suffer violence by arson, theft, and devastation. So homicides and those who strike with malice," that's the first regular kind of murderer, "those who destroy and plunder," now we're on to the tyrants, "they're all punished in this first round of those being punished for violence, but they're in different groups. Men can raise violent hands against himself and his own goods, so the next round after this are people who commit suicide." And it goes on and on to various and worse forms of violence. He describes suicide as being self-robbery. But before he gets to self-robbery, to suicide, he talks about tyranny as robbery of other people's lives and property. Which I just, I was struck by this because as we talk about Bitcoin and the financial system and what's wrong with it biblically and ethically, sometimes Christians kind of get uncomfortable talking about it or focusing on it, and they say, well, what's the big deal? It's just stuff, or it's just money, or it's just property. But historically and theologically and philosophically, we have long understood that to take someone's property is in many ways to take something of themselves. And that this is why in our kind of legal code, why generally people are authorized not just to defend themselves, from violence, but also their stuff. You don't have to, of course. You should try to not harm other people if you don't have to, even if they're harming you. But this is why even a lot of Christian theologians have said it's legitimate for people to defend property as a form of defending your own life, because your property is your life in a lot of ways. And we talk about this a lot with Bitcoin, that the reason money is so important as a technology, the reason money is so important ethically, why God talks so much about money and monetary and financial sins, is because money is the kind of distillation of people's labor. It's people working and compressing their time and their energy into something that can be saved and traded now and in the future. And that there's something, again, can you focus too much on money? Can you be too fixated on it? Of course. We talked about that last time. Dante already has walked through seeing the punishment of the prodigal and of the miserly. But there is something really good and beautiful about people being able to protect their time and their work, because your work is how you love other people in this world. That's the main way that you love your neighbor, is by working and giving the fruit of your work toward other people, not just in kind of thinking abstractly about how I just like people. No, love is actually something that costs you things that are precious to you, your time and your work and your money. So yeah, it's something that I was really struck by thinking about these things that we care about today in the Bitcoin world and in the technology world, but that actually people's possessions and wealth and savings are very important, and we shouldn't be too spiritual to not care about it and not care about people losing it, especially when it's done deceptively or over a very long period of time, just enough to where people don't notice. That's still a form of tyranny, I think Dante would say.
I think it's pretty crazy, actually. The way that fiat currency works is it's almost allowing people to time warp, in the sense of you could work for 20 years, save up as much as you can for retirement, and then they can print all these dollars and literally take 10 years of your life away.
Right.
It happened already in the past, right? It's like, it kind of goes back to the part one we were talking about, how it's not just your money, it's your time that you're spending or saving. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what your money is. It's your time saved up. And when they take it away, it's not that you're not supposed to spend your time. It's that the individual especially the individual that is seeking after the Lord, knows better how to spend it
Right.
than the tyrant that is taking it from them.
Right. And I think it's also why some of our technological innovations can also become their own kind of idols, because they appear to, and often do in many ways, give us back a lot of time. And they appear to be able to compress a lot of time. And,
Even
it's
with like AI, I feel like I'm pulling time from the future.
Right.
It was like, I would have had to take 6 months to code this, and now I can do it in an afternoon.
Right. And so, just like money, this is an incredible power to have. And power often corrupts people and allures them and draws them away from God. And so we still, I think, need to kind of resist the draw to just hand ourselves over to these things completely, whether it's money or devices or AI or technology or whatever it is. Because, they are admittedly powerful. They can do a lot of good things. But ultimately, you were only made to find rest in God, not in being endlessly productive and not in endlessly compressing your time down into almost nothing.
Well, and also being limited, like the Ecclesiastes thing we were talking about before.
Right.
You just have to accept that we're creatures.
Right.
We don't want to do that.
So one of the more interesting things, too, about this part of the poem and this part of hell, where Dante's imagining how God's showing his judgment on sin, is you have the violent murderers, just regular old murderers, then you have tyrants. And then he comes across, the next group of people he comes across are the usurers, people who commit usury. So usury is an old word that has to do with charging interest or charging excessive interest. There's a lot of debate in the Middle Ages and leading into the Reformation, early modern period, about what exactly is usury, what's legitimate charging of interest, and what's sinful charging of interest. Christians and the church have generally been pretty gun-shy about making money off of money and have been generally very critical of charging interest at all. One of the kind of major divergences, I think, in the 1500s between the Protestants and the Roman Catholics was, again, you can criticize Protestants for this. You can see directions that this went that became unhealthy. But Protestants generally started to say, I don't think all interest is wrong. And it wasn't just the Protestants. You have guys like Thomas Aquinas already in the Middle Ages, who's one of the primo Roman Catholic theologians, already starting to understand that there is a distinction between good interest and bad interest, legitimate interest and sinful interest. And so we don't have time to go into all that today, but usury at least is, the bad kind of interest, the bad kind of ripping people off, taking advantage of them, especially the poor, charging crazy amounts of interest just because you can, because they have no power to do anything about it, and because you can take advantage of them and their ignorance and their powerlessness to.
It's kind of the opposite of inflation. You're stealing their future time instead of their past time.
Yeah, and so Dante has a special place in hell for the usurers, for the people who make tons of money off of charging money to other people.
Bitcoiners would call it rent seeking.
Yeah, and again, it's a lot of theologians kind of already started understanding that there are forms of charging interest that are okay. That you should have to. It's okay to expect someone to pay you for what you could have been doing with your money instead.
Yeah, but the usurious form.
But the usurious form,
the modern vernacular would be.
Yeah, and so one of the things that Bitcoiners get wound up about today is the many deeply embedded forms of usury in our financial system today. A lot of rent seeking, a lot of what we call the quintillion effect, where people who are closest to the money printer benefit the most from it and can run out and take out all kinds of debt on it and, kind of give themselves more and more of a kind of jet fuel to get further and further ahead of people who are further away from the money printer and further away from the financial system. Because again, this is one of these things that drives people crazy, is it's money printing generally benefits those who are already very wealthy and benefits the financial system and people connected to it. And so the total dependence of our whole system on debt, and again, this is debt that can't be repaid, that won't be repaid. It will just get worse and worse. This is one of the things that Bitcoin, we hope and trust, will fix in large part, because it disincentivizes this kind of usurious focus on charging interest, making money, being focused, being close to the money printer. A lot of the things that we are really angry about as a society in terms of the financial and the monetary system, a lot of the things that Bitcoiners are very critical of, I think are close neighbors of what Dante is criticizing when he criticizes the usurers as those who just keep making more and more money on the backs of people who can't do anything about it. But one of the things I was really struck by as he talks about usury, he kind of like with the tyrants. We talked about how tyrants are those who don't just murder your body, they murder your stuff. He makes a similar point about usury. He says that your art, and he uses the word art, not art like painting paintings art. It's a broader term here. It means like your work, basically, kind of your workmanship, the product of what you make, which of course can include creative art, like paintings and statues and things, but it can include things like tables you make, houses you build, bank accounts you labor to fill up. Dante says, by way of Virgil, his guide, art imitates nature, capital N nature. Art flows from God. Our workmanship is a reflection of what it means to be God's image bearers. He says that he does it the way that an apprentice does his master. Your art may be said to be God's grandchild. From art and nature, man was meant to take his daily bread to live, if you recall the book of Genesis near the beginning, talking about Genesis 1 and 2. God tells Adam and Eve, go out and work. This is the immediate extension of what it means Genesis 1 and 2 tell us of Adam and Eve being made in God's image. It's to go out and exercise dominion. Their art, their work in the world, their dominion is meant to reflect God. And their art and their work reflects them. It's an extension of themselves. This is why tyranny is tyranny. That's why Dante says you should care about the murder of property, not just the murder of people. And as people reflect themselves through their work and through their labor, Dante is saying here, you are also reflecting God as God's image bearer. So I thought that was interesting. Your art, your work, we would say, is like God's grandchild. So if we as humans are God's children, so to speak, and our work is our own children, so to speak, that makes work and labor and wealth and money God's grandchild. Kind of a cute little poetic image there. And I don't know that people usually think of work in those terms. I think we often think of work and wealth and money as like these things that are kind of dirty and gross and like, oh, I just kind of have to do it, or you just kind of got to grit your teeth and do it. Or we totally disconnect it from God and we become obsessed with it. And we don't think of this as something that's ultimately coming from God or meant to reflect God.
Or in the case of the transhumanists, to replace God.
Yeah, exactly. The grandchild murders the grandfather, so to speak. And then you bow down to your children and worship them now.
Zeus is killing his Titan father or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. We should talk about that sometime. So Virgil here, the guide through hell, explains to Dante the traveler, this is how things are supposed to work. God makes us, we make stuff. Our stuff is supposed to kind of reflect and be offered back to God, kind of like a grandchild going back to a grandfather. But he says, here's the problem with usury, all these financial shenanigans that have been going on for thousands of years. He says, but the usurer, adopting other means, scorns nature in herself, nature, i.e., God's world, God's creation. And in her pupil, art, he invests his hope in something else. And so he says usury, financial shenanigans, taking advantage of people monetarily, getting more and more and more and more wealthy unjustly on the backs of people who can't do anything about it. He says this is actually a form of not just scorning God and God's creation, but also scorning work and scorning the way people have labored to build things. So again, it's like you said, it's a kind of robbery of people, not directly. It often is not directly. It often happens very indirectly over a long period of time, but that doesn't make it not robbery. And Dante says it's a form of scorn. And, again, this interesting image, the usurer invests his hope in something else. And so, everybody invests spiritually, so to speak. The question is, where do you invest it? Where is your hope invested, so to speak? It's meant to be, Dante is saying, and we would say, you're meant to invest your hope in God and in his kingdom. And your work, your art, so to speak, would reflect that to the extent that you are invested in God. Whereas Jesus said, as you're building up your treasure in heaven. And for Jesus, that doesn't mean, therefore, stop doing anything in the world, stop working, stop handling money. Jesus is saying, when you have God as your greatest treasure, money then is in its right place, and it's there, available and ready to use for God's glory and for the good of other people. So, yeah.
I think that's a perfect ending. We're going to have a part 3?
We'll see. I got to keep reading.
All right. Maybe we'll have a part 3.
Okay.